Hi, I'm Caroline Labor, and today's the fourth video in my Money Mindset series. And so far, we've looked at savings, debt, we've looked at income, and today I'm going to talk to you about income goals. So, talking about income goals is a slight slant, I guess, on income. So, when we talked about income, we talked more about whether you feel like you have enough money. So, whether money lasts each month or each fortnight around your pay cycle. And then secondly, about the idea that you really need to have gratitude about your income, because if you can be grateful about what you have, then you'll open yourself up for receiving so that you can actually generate more income. So that's sort of a good segue into today's topic around income goals, because this takes your income a step further. So when it comes to income goals, really what I'm referring to here is where you'd like to be with regards to your income. So whether you deliberately set any goals for yourself, maybe for the year, the question is there a specific amount of money that you're going after, whether that's in your career or in your business? And so when I talk to people generally about their income goals, usually I find that there's two major challenges when it comes to setting effective income goals, or actually having them in the first place. And so the first challenge is that some people don't actually set any goals at all. And so when you don't set a goal, you end up having a default goal, which is usually somebody else's goal. So a good example of this is for a lot of people who are in corporate jobs. So you sort of deem that a certain role is worth a particular salary, and if doing that job isn't aligned with what you really want to do, then that goal, the amount of income that you earn, is basically a default goal. And you're generally spending your time going after somebody else's goals because it's sort of a means to an end to getting that income that you want. So it may not genuinely be your goal. And so a lot of people say things like, I just ended up here, or I just landed in this job. And often that's why. It's because of the absence of having clear goals that were your own. So specifically an income goal that you were targeting, and perhaps even how you plan to earn that income. So when it comes to setting income goals, a lot of people, by not setting a clear goal, actually impose this ceiling, if you like, on what their income goal is, as well as what their earning capability is. And I saw a lot of this when I was in the corporate world. So specifically, I can remember running a workshop for a group of management accountants, and I remember asking the room of people who here could see themselves as a CFO in the next 10 years. And I wasn't really surprised, but maybe a little disappointed that nobody put their hand up. Now, I'm not saying that if you're an accountant, you have to aspire to being a CFO. But what I found interesting about this is that that sort of told me straight away that a lot of the people who attended this workshop, because they were wanting to know how they could better themselves and how they could increase their income, were actually also saying to me that, well, they didn't really have any major stretch goals around what their earning capability could be, or more so, that they didn't really believe that they were at that level. And so what's important about that example is, again, it's not so much that if you're an accountant, you need to want to be a CFO. It's that if you don't believe you have the capability of being a CFO, then that doesn't just stop you from getting to that CFO level. It actually stops you from getting that next promotion at the very next level as well, because you usually stop yourself from exhibiting the behaviors that you need to make even small amounts of progress. And so there's something in there around, what you want versus what you truly believe that you can do. And so the other example of that too is really to do with the second type of challenge around income goals. And so the first type was not setting goals at all. And then I see this second type of challenge, which is that people set income goals that they can't relate to. And so a classic example of that is, I remember when I read The Secret many years ago, there was a part in the book where they said to print out a check, write $1 million on it, and stick it up on your wall and look at it every day. And so I can kind of get that concept as far as getting clear about what you want or having an aspirational goal. But the problem is, if you're setting yourself a goal of $1 million, that maybe at the moment you're earning $50,000 or $100,000 a year, then sometimes that goal is so far out of your reach, or it seems so far out of your reach that you just can't relate to it. And therefore you do absolutely nothing about going after that goal. And so there's this huge gap between what you think you want and what you believe you're capable of achieving. And that can really affect the quality of the action that you take towards that goal. And so I want to ask you where you're at when it comes to your own income goal. So firstly, do you even have one? And if not, we're going to talk shortly about why you don't. So I want to do a test with everyone who's watching, and what I want you to do is to quickly visualize that if you joined me on my last video where I talked about income, then I want you to picture what your current amount of income is. So whether that's an amount that you earn each month or an annual salary, just the number that resonates with you when I say income. And if you have already set yourself an income goal, then I want you to picture that amount of money. And so what I want you to do now is to think about that amount of money. And so for this example, I'm just going to use $10,000 a month. And what I want you to do is to double that. So that $10,000 becomes $20,000 a month. And so I want you to imagine that you and I are working together and we've just been in this great coaching session. And I've said to you that we're going to agree right now that for the rest of this year, that new amount of income that you're going after is going to be $20,000. And you're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen. So as I've said this to you, I want you to think about the feelings or thoughts that have come up at the idea of doubling your income goal. And in particular, me telling you to double your income goal. And so often some of the responses I get is that people might feel annoyed about that, especially if you went to the effort of already setting your own income goal. And so if we then think about that, why really is that annoying? Usually what people say to me is, well, it's ridiculous because I put all this effort and energy into my own goal. And if we're talking about income that you're already earning, then people often say, well, that's how much my job pays, so I can't just double that. And so it kind of becomes this ridiculous idea. And I guess an extension of that is that something seems ridiculous, it's actually because it seems impossible to you. And so if that idea is kind of resonating with you, then I want to challenge that a bit. Because if you picture that income goal, I want you to, imagine when you think about the fact that you can't, double that or achieve that, can you think of anybody who is earning that amount of money, or maybe even more than that? And usually most people can think of someone. And so you might know of someone who's, say, in a really successful corporate job, or someone who owns a successful business. And so we can generally agree that there are people earning that amount of money. And so if you can agree with me on that, then what this is really saying is that it's not that the outcome is impossible overall. What you're saying is that it's impossible for you specifically. And so when we want to think about, what thoughts and beliefs sit behind that, what we've established here is that it's not impossible. So why is it impossible for you to double your income? And usually that kind of a response, or the thoughts and beliefs around that, tend to be fear-based. And they can be all sorts of fears. So typically it's around fear of failure, maybe because you missed some goals in the past, or maybe you failed at something in the past. And so we store that energy, and there can be this stored fear about maybe failing again. Or, maybe you've just never gone after something that big. So there's this fear of failure because it just seems too big for what you believe you're capable of. And that all really stems from the fear of not being good enough, and sometimes also not being worthy enough to receive that amount of money. And so, then another one is thinking about, well, what would people think of me if I did earn that amount of money? So if I achieved a goal that big, what would people say? And that can be a driver not to do something as well. And so I want to talk to you about what causes us to have this fear. So what causes those beliefs? And one of the very common factors that I see when I work with my clients, and I touched on this in my previous video, is that a really big driver is growing up in poverty or in middle-class families. And that's because when you grow up in a middle-class family, you can get brought up on this notion that money always runs out, or it's not enough for people like us. And so this really creates a set point around what you believe you're worth in financial terms, because you're surrounded by this energy that the money does always run out. And so that drives you to sort of keep your income at a similar level as well. And it's not even necessarily about the specific income amount, it's that you might spend it all after you earn it. And so a lot of that stems from our upbringing and based on what you observed as a child around money. And then another thing that really drives people to not set income goals or not believe that they can achieve them is that we're very much primed to want to fit in. So we're primed with this desire to fit in with our tribe, and that's usually our family. And so again, if you did grow up in a middle class family, and maybe even your extended family was middle class too, then we tend to push ourselves to fit in. And an easy way to do that is to earn a very similar amount of money to what everyone else in your family earned. And in a lot of cases, even if you are able to sort of push through that barrier and earn a bit more, then people do find ways to not keep more money. And you can do this either by spending it all or by getting into debt. And so there's this very strong drive in us to want to fit in with our family because no one wants to be left out and to be out on their own. And so I want you to think about whether this applies to you at all. And a good way to test whether you might be affected by these types of family paradigms is to ask yourself, well, what would my family think if I suddenly earned that amount of money? Or if I told people I was earning that much, what would they say? So, I'm sure that most people's parents would actually be happy for them. But, it's whether you feel there might be some judgment around that as well. And, would they think you're greedy to want to earn money like that? And, they might say, well, what would you do with that amount of money? And would you be one of the rich people who are bad? And so there's all these types of beliefs that commonly stem from middle class families. So all of this stuff really drives us to not go after our income goals because we might have grown up with these feelings that it's wrong to earn that amount of money. And so what we want to really change there is the energy around that. So that, these feelings, like I've just said, is really what stops people from going forward because we want to fit in. And so what happens a lot of the time is that when you do try and set these really big stretch goals, then you go about working on them and then all of a sudden it triggers these deeply held beliefs and fears that are already running around in your nervous system. And so understandably, we want to avoid these types of feelings at all cost. And so this just causes you to sort of fall into this cycle where you don't set goals. And even if you do, then you either find ways to not work on them at all, or you start to work on them and then you sabotage your own efforts. And it's all tied down to this family paradigm that we go about operating off because it's just been with us for such a long time. And so what a lot of people do is rather than focusing on a specific income goal, they'll focus instead on feel-good ideas around money like abundance and wealth. And it's because they feel good doing that. These are things that are easy to relate to. And so rather than thinking about, well, where's that next $1,000 going to come from? Or where is the next $10,000 going to come from? It's all about getting into the specifics. And when you do that, it starts to get uncomfortable. And so hopefully now you can understand why and what it starts to trigger within us. So let's talk quickly about things you can do to fix that problem if you related to any of that. So the first one is you actually just want to come to terms with some of those fears around money and fears around achieving your goal. And what you want to do is start to neutralize that energy. And the great news here is that if you have resonated with what I've talked about today, then you've actually got some awareness about it now. And that's always the first step. So if you're not aware that there's a problem, then you can't actually do anything to fix it because you don't know that you've got anything to fix. So now hopefully if you have been feeling stuck around your income goals, then you might be aware of what it is that might have been causing you to be stuck. And so what you want to do is start to neutralize some of that energy. And in my previous videos, I've talked about a technique that I use called tapping, which is simply where we tap on some acupressure points. And basically, if you want to sort of shortcut that process, you can just tap on the one point, so your collarbone point. And you just want to focus on, maybe 1 or 2 points. And you can also tap on, like we call this the karate chop point. You can use this one as well. And they're just quick and easy ways that if you want to sort of stop and have a conversation with yourself, then these are a couple of points that you can use. And so what I want you to do is just come up with a list of fears, just as I did earlier. And, they can be fears around things like, I'm scared I'm not good enough to achieve that. I'm scared that I'm not worthy of achieving that. I don't feel like I deserve that. Or I might get knocked down by my family and I'd have to hide this from them. So these are all the types of fears that, you just want to make a quick list of, and over time, more of them will come out and they'll come to you naturally. And then what you want to do is sort of have this conversation with yourself and just talk about them. So, just as I've done in this video, and just start to tack on these points. And the effect of the tapping is that it actually neutralizes this energy that you're carrying in your nervous system. And so I want you to experience it for yourself. So come up with this list of fears and then just talk through them. And it's okay, by the way, that you're focusing on a negative conversation with yourself, because the effect of the tapping, as I'm doing now, doesn't compound the problem, it just neutralizes the energy that's running through your body. So I just want you to have this conversation and, just be tapping on your collarbone point. And you just want to go through and start saying, well, I have all these fears. I didn't completely understand where they came from, but I'm glad I have this awareness now of what went on with me as a child. And I know that I learned all this stuff from the environment around me, and that's okay. I'm going to have some compassion and understanding for myself. And I just want to acknowledge that I do have these fears. And I have this fear around feeling like I'm not good enough. I have fear around questioning my capability. And you can just continue going through and tapping through it. And you'll find that even though you're talking about really negative concepts, you're actually going to feel physically better. And so over time, if you keep repeating this process, you'll find firstly that maybe some more stuff you weren't aware of will come to the surface. And that's okay, you can just keep tapping through it. And then you'll actually find that you really start to neutralize that energy, and some of these beliefs are going to stop affecting you, and you'll find that some of them will seem quite ridiculous to you. And you might say that I can get that I felt that way, but I don't know where it came from, and so I'm just going to walk away from that now because it seems ridiculous. And you'll see that when you do that, you really start to shift this energy and your results are going to start changing. And so another thing that you can do if you haven't been setting goals is you want to start setting some goals. So some income goals, but again, think about what I said earlier in this video around not going straight for that $1 million, if you're still on, say, $50,000 today, because that's too big a leap and you'll end up just doing nothing about it. So, go for something in between. So it should still be a stretch goal, but not that much of a stretch. And once you've achieved that goal and you've proved to yourself that you can do it, then you can set that $1 million goal. But start with something that you can actually write a plan towards and tick off your achievement list. And then the other thing that goes with that is you should only set a goal if you're going to accompany it with actions. So there's no point just writing an amount of money on a piece of paper, sticking it up on your wall without having a set action plan behind it. So when you think income goals, I want you to think actions, and I want you to start thinking about things that you can do every day to gradually move yourself towards that goal. And so the last thing which you can do, which we talked about in the previous video as well, is to really shift towards that state of gratitude as well. So continue to feel grateful and to express gratitude for what you already have. And they can be simple things that you might take for granted at the moment, like the roof over your head, the family that you have, maybe if you're able to travel. So just all sorts of things, like it can be anything you're grateful for. And if you've never done this before, then just try to name 5 things a day. And again, by expressing gratitude, then you're going to shift your energy and you're going to open yourself up to receiving. And so if you try those things, the combination of all of that is that it's going to help you to start to shift into a more abundant mindset, but by taking practical actions. So it goes well beyond wishful thinking, and you're actually changing the physical energy within your body, which will change your thoughts and beliefs. And then if you accompany that with action, then you'll actually start to see yourself move forward with some of those goals. And so I hope that's been helpful today. Please leave me a comment if you've observed any of this or if you've tried any of these techniques before. And if you are struggling with any of your income goals and you want to break through what's been holding you back, then feel free to comment below or send me a message, especially if it feels quite personal to you, and I'll be more than happy to chat with you about that and to help you navigate your way through it. So that was it on income goals today. In the next video on money mindset, I'm going to talk to you about expenses. So thank you for joining me. I'm Caroline Labor, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.